Closer to the microphone. How's that? Okay. All righty. I would like to introduce Elizabeth Arledge to you. She is a consultant with Evergreen Consulting. She will be working with us closely on the compensation study today. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth. Elizabeth has been with Evergreen for over 13 years. So she has had lots and lots of experience in doing these types of studies, and we're really confident and excited to finally get this done.
Thanks, Susan. Can you guys hear me back there, or do you want me to be at the mic? If you'd prefer me to be at the mic, I can, but if you can hear me, I'm happy to speak without it. So, and if at any point you can't hear me, let me know, and I'll be happy to step behind the mic. As Susan mentioned, my name is Elizabeth Arledge, and I'm with a firm called Evergreen Solutions, and we're happy today to come here and work with you guys on a compensation and classification study. And what I want to do this morning is talk a little bit about who we are. I want to talk a little bit about what your study goals are, and then I want to talk specifically about the employee participation in this process. And this is a very informal process, so if you have any questions while I'm speaking, just let me know. I'll be happy to answer them. And for those of you who did not hear, there is a sign-in sheet. So if you didn't get an opportunity to sign in before this started, please do so when we're finished. Evergreen Solutions is a national management consulting firm, and we do public sector work only. We have a human resources practice. We also have a K through 12 and a higher education practice. So what we're able to do, particularly in this study, is combine our education experience as well as our human resources experience. We've worked in about 41 states, and we do compensation and classifications as one of our bread and butter type projects. We've done several hundred of these. We probably do 40 to 50 a year. In every study that we do, we use the same methodology so that we know what we're doing will translate across any project. However, we tailor it to meet the needs of the client. So what you're getting is a tried and true methodology, and while we go through it, we make sure that we identify the uniqueness of your particular organization. We talked about your study goals. There were a few things that were identified in the request for proposals, and I put those up here. In particular, we were asked to review the competitiveness of the college's job classification and salary grade systems, which would include the competitive market considerations for compensation. And what that really means is how do you compare to the market? So that's one thing we're going to be looking at. And then the next one is ensure the classification and compensation systems are aligned with the college's mission and values and are competitive with the job market. And finally, analyze the positions to determine internal equity. Really what we're doing in this study are two things. We are going to look at internal equity, and when I talk about internal equity, what I mean is if someone over here is doing a job and a person over here is doing a different job, but it has similar complexity, are you being paid a similar amount? Not exactly the same, but similar. We also look at what I call vertical equity. Are supervisors making more than the people that they supervise? So that's one component of a compensation and classification study. And in that process, we also look to see if your jobs are classified correctly. Because over time, as you know, you may start off in a position, and as technology changes, as the organization changes, your duties change over the years, and after 10 or 12 years, you may be doing a completely different job than your job title would indicate. So that's another piece that we look at in internal equity. And then the second part of that is the external equity. How do you compare to the market? So we look at internal equity, we look at external equity, and then we come up with recommendations to provide to the college on how they can have a compensation system that's fair and equitable to all. So when I talked about our methodology earlier, what I want to do is just go over an overview for you of what that methodology looks like. So in order to meet internal and external equity goals, the first thing we do is that we request employee descriptions of work performed. And that's one of the main things I want to talk about today. when we do this type of study, one of the first things we ask is for employees to tell us about their jobs. Not about you in particular or how you do your job, but tell me about your job. Why does the college have that particular job, and what are the tasks that you do? And we're going to talk specifically about how you will communicate that to me here in a few minutes. But that's one of the main things that we use when we're doing this type of analysis. You tell me what your job is. Then we will analyze, based on the information you provide, as well as information that Human Resources provides about compensation practices, meaning how does the college pay in compared to the salary ranges. We will analyze your information. We'll analyze the Human Resources information to look at your current pay and philosophy. Then we will evaluate those positions for internal equity. Again, the information you provide to us is what we will look at to determine internal equity. We will survey the market to determine your competitiveness. So in the focus groups, and I'll talk a little bit about that more later, I will be asking people to tell me, who do you think your competitors are? If you were to leave, where would you go to take a job? Or if someone's thinking about coming here, what's another organization that they might go to instead? So we find out who your competitors are, and we send them a survey of select positions, and we ask them to tell us what salary ranges they have for those positions. And then we can use that data to compare what you're doing to what the market is doing. So we'll take the information that we gained from you as employees about your job, the analysis we've done on internal equity, the analysis we've done on external equity, and we will come up with a pay plan that we think is fair and equitable for the college. And that is, very generally speaking, how we go through this process. Do you guys have any questions about the study itself and how we do the study? Because what I'm going to move on to next is specifically talking about your participation and how we get the information on your jobs. Okay, and I will be here afterwards, so if you have a specific question or you think of something, you can certainly talk to me afterwards. And I have business cards up here as well. So specifically talking about employee participation, the first thing that we do are orientation sessions. I like to come in and do exactly what I'm doing right now. Talk to employees about what the study is and tell you how we do the study, and then talk to you about how we would like you to participate. So this is an orientation session. Also today and tomorrow we'll be doing focus groups with a subset of employees. And in those instances, what I like to do is get feedback from you on what you like and don't like about your current system. For instance, there may be something in particular that they do here with compensation that you like and you don't want us to change. Or there might be something, for instance, you might not have gotten a raise in the last few years and you'd like to see that changed. So what we'd like to do is get feedback from you on what you like and don't like. We'd like to get feedback on positions that you think may not be classified correctly. We want to find out who you think your competitors are. Who should we be surveying in that market assessment? And then we'd like to find out from you what your top concerns are when it comes to pay here at the college. So that's what goes on in the focus groups. I also do some interviews with some of your key personnel and ask them some similar questions. We'll talk more about this here in just a minute, but to me the most important part of employee participation is the job assessment tool. And what that is an online survey that you fill out that tells me what your job is. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we use that information to base our analysis on. So it's very important that you participate and that your coworkers participate and provide that feedback to us. We also have a thing called the management issues tool. So if you're a supervisor and you feel like you have a position in your organization that's not classified correctly or is difficult to hire into, maybe you feel like the salary range is too low for that particular position, supervisors can fill out this tool to give us, again, another bit of information that we can use. Hey, Elizabeth, I think you should look at this position particularly. Now, we'll look at all of them in our analysis, but it's helpful when people point out things that they think are an issue. And again, I just mentioned, of course, interviews with some of the senior personnel. So these are the ways in which employees participate in the process. Most of this is done up front, and the next probably 3 to 4 weeks. And then after that, we will be doing our analysis. So what I'd like to talk about now specifically is the job assessment tool. And this tool is designed, as I mentioned, to gather information about your job. In my opinion, this is the most critical part of the study because we use this information in our analysis. And there's no better person to tell me about a position than the person who is in the position. That's why we ask you to give us that information. And sometimes people ask me, well, Elizabeth, why don't you use the job description? Why do I have to fill this out? Why don't you just use my job description? Well, quite often we find that job descriptions are outdated. And so what we would like, again, to do is get the most accurate, most recent, most current information, and that comes from employees. The job assessment tool helps us understand how work is organized here, and it will help us determine whether or not the organization is paying fairly and competitively, not only with relation to the market, but also internally. Again, I'm over here doing a job, someone over here is doing a completely different job, but if they have similar complexities, similar responsibilities as far as supervision, those kinds of things, are those positions being paid similarly? Now, the job assessment tool is an online tool. And basically what will happen is you will receive an email from us on Monday, a week from today, that will have a username, password, and a link. You click on that link, it will take you to the online tool. And again, you'll receive all this in an email, so you don't need to worry about writing down any of the information. It will be generated from our organization. And you will have 3 weeks, because I think you guys have a spring break in there as well. So we've extended it from March 3rd to March 21st to fill this out. And then after that, there's a 1-week supervisory review period. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that supervisory review period. I want to emphasize again, this is not on individual performance. It's not about how you do your job or what skills you bring, but about the job itself. What does the job entail? What skills should someone have? What education should someone have in order to do this job? So we ask the employees to fill it out, and then we ask the supervisor to take a look and see what the employees wrote down. The supervisor cannot change anyone's answer. They can only agree or disagree. If they disagree, they have to tell me why. From our standpoint, we want the most accurate review of that position. So that's why we ask for a second person to take a look at it and validate what has been written down. Now, a couple of common questions come up. Well, Elizabeth, why do you need that second person to take a look at it? Again, we'd like a check and balance. We want to make sure it's accurate data. And in some instances, we find two things. We find that an employee hasn't been on the job very long and may not understand all of the things that job involves. And two, we find more often than not, people underrepresent rather than overrepresent what they do. So again, we want to make sure we have the most accurate understanding of that position. And supervisors, again, can't change answers. They can only agree or disagree. If they disagree, and the disagreement is such that we feel like there's a conflict, we will contact the individual and the supervisor to resolve it. Again, for us, the most important thing is to truly understand the position. So there'll be a 3-week period where employees can fill out the tool, and then there's a 1-week period where supervisors can go in and do the review. Now I want to walk you through the job assessment tool so you have an idea what it looks like, and you can kind of expect what's coming. There's a couple of things that I like to mention to people. One is it's very difficult to sit down at the computer and remember all the things you do. So what I suggest is between now and Monday, maybe put a little sheet of paper on your desk or think a little bit about all the things that you do so that you can make some notes, so when you sit down, those thoughts are fresh in your mind. There's another way, too, that you can jot down some notes, is when you get the email, you can actually print a hard copy of the survey and fill it out ahead of time so that when you sit down at the computer, you can simply go through it much easier. You can go in and come back out of the assessment tool. You don't have to fill it out all at once. You can save it and come back. So there are several tricks there that you can use. Again, spending some time up front to think about it will be helpful when you sit down to actually fill it out. So these are the sections on the JAT. And if you look at it, and if you looked at your job description, it look very similar. So what we ask for at the very beginning is a job overview. Then we get into your essential job functions, the type of work that you do, education and experience. And then we ask you 5 factors: leadership, working conditions, complexity, decision-making, and relationships. We ask you to give us some feedback in those areas. And then we finish it with financial responsibilities, equipment and machinery, and then the physical skills, physical abilities this job needs. Excuse me. So we'll take each section, we'll look at it a little bit more in depth. Now, it will look a little different on the computer, but it'll be the same types of information. The first thing we ask for is a brief overview. And that's the kind of thing where if I ran into you at the store, grocery store, and you said, hey, you know, I work at the college. And I'd say, what do you do at the college? You'd probably give me a 2, 3, 4 sentence answer. That's what we're looking for here, just a general overview of what you do. And again, I ask you to kind of take a step back and look at this as a third party. This isn't about you, it's about the position. Then we ask you about the official work week and hours. And we ask you about your supervisory roles. Do you supervise people? And if you do, how many full-time, part-time? And you can, again, print this document when you get the email so you can read through it before you begin. Then we move to essential job functions. These are those essential job functions that your job entails. So you may do 20, 30, 40 things in your job, but what we want you to do is think about the things that are most core to that position. Why does the college have that job? What we find is there's usually 10 to 15 essential functions that most people have. If you have more than that, that's fine, but we usually find it's 10 to 15 essential functions. That's what we're looking for here. So we're asking you to tell us what are the essential job functions in your job. And once you write those down, it'll ask you to tell us the function. Do you do that every day? Do you do it every week, monthly? And then how much of the overall job, percentage of time, do you spend on that function? And for some of you, there are some things that you only do once a year, but it may be a significant chunk of your time. So don't forget those things. Sometimes we get caught up in what's happening right now, and we don't think about, oh, well, in July, I have to reconcile all of my books or something like that. So think across the year. Yes, sir?
For the percentage of time spent on the function, can that be greater than 100% total?
No.
Well,
We'd prefer it not. And the reason that I ask you for percentage is not to do any weighting. It's simply so that I get an idea of how much time you spend in a particular area.
I have no idea how to do that then, because one, if you have to put in the official work week, for a lot of people the official work week is less than the actual time we spend. Plus, some of us multitask. You can have multiple things going on simultaneously. You're just attending to, and they do take a significant percentage of time, but they're happening simultaneously. So I don't know how to do that and keep it at 100.
Can you do it relationally? For instance, if you say, I've got these 5 tasks, and all 5 tasks are equally as important, they take equal amounts of time, then maybe you divide those into 10, 10, and 10, and then the other tasks that are less important, maybe they're 4, 5, 6%. What I'm really getting to is not so much the number, is understanding where you're spending the majority of your time. So if there's a way in which you can do that, that's what we're looking for.
I may need to talk to you off.
Okay. And if you have some concerns about that, please do. And also take my card if you have a question with that later. But again, what I'm trying to understand is where you're spending your time. Yes, ma'am. I would shoot for about 15, 10 to 15. Again, some of your jobs may be more complex, where 15 would be appropriate. Some jobs are not, where maybe 4 or 5 would be appropriate. So again, this is structured much like a job description. So if you're thinking about that in terms of your job description, you're probably looking at about 15 tasks. Yes?
On the previous screen, I saw that you wanted work experience and education, but I thought this was about the job and not about the person.
It is, and that slide's coming up, and I'm going to talk more about that in just a minute. So for your essential job functions, let me just hit that one more time. What we're looking for are those core tasks that you do. For instance, in my job, my essential job functions are project management, client relationships, marketing. Those are probably my 3 core functions. I do a lot of work on the computer. I do a lot of data analysis using Excel, but that's to support my core functions. So I wouldn't write down that I use that understanding or utilizing Excel is one of my essential job functions. It's part of how it supports what I do as a project manager. For my analyst, whose job is to analyze, then he would write down, I use Excel all day long and send a lot of stuff to Elizabeth. So think of it in terms of what are the core reasons that your job exists here. But we all do many, many, many things. What are those core things? When you're done listing those, we ask you to choose the 5 that you think are the most important. So we ask you to only choose 5 here. The most important are ones that most clearly define your role. Yes?
And just confirming that I understand this right. What we list here is not necessarily tied to our job description.
Correct. It's what you do. Because again, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes those job descriptions are out of date. So what we want you to do is tell us, and we'll have copies of your job descriptions already, but what we want to know from you is what does that job now entail? And they may be the same, may not.
I have a follow-up.
Yes.
On the previous screen, you mentioned the different education and that stuff, and one of those was supervising, right? Number of full-time and part-time employees. Again, that's not tied to the job description. So I'm thinking about my staff, right? We run the tutoring programs. In my staff, supervising is not part of their job description duties, but they supervise. I mean, they're the grown-ups in charge of a whole bunch of part-time staff for a lot of the day. So I just want to confirm that, I mean, how do they, do you know what I mean? Like,
Do they have supervisory responsibility on paper?
No.
Okay, that's the question we're asking for there. So if I am on paper your supervisor, that's what I want to know there. However, if their job is to supervise a group of people in doing an activity, that would be an essential job function.
Okay, so what happens on the previous page, section 1, and what happens, section 2 may clarify deficiencies in the job description.
Yes, and as we go through, you'll see all of these pieces will be put together to give us the overall picture of your job. Yes.
And the other thing I wanted to mention is when you talk about supervision, I think it's important for people to understand that when we talk about supervision of employees, we're talking about being responsible for their overseeing their positions and also the appraising their performance. So if people aren't doing that, that kind of differentiates whether it's on their job description, I think.
Yeah, in that first slide, the supervisory piece is, are you doing their performance evaluation? Are you the individual's supervisor in the organization's records? But you may also, separate from that, you may have responsibilities to supervise groups as part of your job, people that don't necessarily work for you. So supervision is used in 2 different contexts there. Okay, in section, oh yes.
I just had one comment to make. I think it helped for me, because I'm in a supervisory role, to talk about, or to have examples from you. For example, project management. And I think a lot of people, when they're going into it, they're thinking, well, I supervise this project over here, or I do this. Whereas it might be helpful to come up with some, like, umbrella terms that could be used as a, I guess, as one area or one function. I'm just wondering if as a consultant, if you run into statements sometime like, you know, it could be something very small, but if you package the 5 small things into one, that could be one function. Does that make sense?
It does, and we really rely on the individual to kind of determine how to package those. I try not to give too much direct. There's that fine line between telling you how to write it, but giving you enough to help you write it. Because I don't want to tell people what to say, and then potentially I have misunderstood, and I've not clearly given you good direction. So I'm in that fine line of think about it and what defines your job. Why does the college have your job here? And those are the things you look for. And you may need to roll up 3 or 4 things, like I did with project management. I could have broken that out and said, well, I'm responsible for writing proposals, or I'm responsible for writing reports and doing those things. But for me, it all falls under the term project management. Those all kind of roll up into it, because I have several other responsibilities. So it really is what your individual taste is in doing it. When we read these and we put all the information together, we do have a good sense of what the job is. And if we don't, we call and ask. So I'm gonna not answer that question. How's that? I don't want to be too direct.
The only reason why I brought it up was that I was here during the last review, and a number of comments that I heard were that they wish that they got a little bit more direction in terms of writing it up to give a better idea of what they're doing. So
Okay.
That's why I brought that up.
Then what I would throw out there in that instance would be think along the lines of 10 to 15 essential functions, and think about in relation to your day, week, month, year, where do you spend the majority of time, and then think about how those tasks impact the college overall. There may be one that's just really, really, really important. That would need to be in there. So think of it from that perspective, and think of it outside of your job. Take a step out of it, look at it as a third-party observer. That would be my feedback. And if you run into problems, again, my cards are up here. Send me an email. Elizabeth, I'm really struggling with this. There's also an email link on the job assessment tool that you can click for help and send an email and say, you know, I'm struggling. I really am having difficulty with this. And we'll talk to you. We'll help you through it. Because again, at the end of the day, what I really want is good data from you.
Thank you.
Yes?
I'm probably jumping the gun, but is there going to be a part on here for a narrative? So I can actually write sentences?
Yes. There are some sections there as we go into the more complex pieces. Again, this section here, we ask you to tell us what type of work you perform, whether it's clerical, manual, labor, technical, administrative, and so on. If you're not exactly sure where your job falls into this, there's a help screen. You can just look at it and read and see where your job falls. And again, if you are not sure or it's not clear as you read through, you're certainly welcome to send us an email and tell us about your specific situation, and we'll give you some guidance there. The next 2 slides, education and experience, are set up very similar to this. Again, this is not about your education and experience. This is about what you feel like someone should have in order to do this job. So we ask you, what type of education should someone be required to have to take this job or be in this job? What licenses, certifications, or professional designations should be required? And then which ones should be preferred? So again, not what you hold, but what someone should hold to have this job. And the experience set up the same way. Someone coming into this job, what kind of experience should they have? Or, should they be required to have? And then we ask you, do you think you should substitute education for experience and vice versa? So this is the part where we talk about education experience being about the job, not about the individual. Now we're going to get into the next 5 sections, and they're all set up like this. And this also has a place for you to give some narrative. In these sections here, we ask you about some of those things that are very difficult to really narrow down. So what we do is we give you some phrases, and we ask you to choose the phrase that most closely matches your job. You can mark others that may apply, but we ask you to select one that most closely matches your job. So they're predefined phrases to help us then kind of compare jobs across an organization. So for instance, in leadership, they're all set up where you kind of start from a very basic and you go down to more complexity. So in this example here, I follow specific directions provided by my supervisor and receive feedback on what I do. So in this instance, no leadership responsibilities, no leadership at all. And then it progresses through. You can see down maybe midway there, I oversee the work of a team engaged in providing specific services, completing specific projects, or assisting other units. So there's leadership qualities, leadership responsibilities there. And then at the very bottom, I determine strategy as well as long-range goals for the organization. So someone who would be, say, at the president level, the executive director level, high level, would probably do things further down the list, determining strategy and that type of thing. So we ask you to read each phrase and then choose the one that you feel most closely matches your job. And in the sentences below, tell us why you chose that. Give us some examples. Tell us why. Yes?
So am I to get that only one of these will be closest match and the other ones will be may apply?
Correct.
Or, I mean, up until a point where
Right.
it doesn't no longer suit my job. Okay.
So one that most closely matches and that others that may apply as appropriate. And then tell us why you chose what you did. Again, similar setup, working conditions. So you see the first one there, I work in a relatively safe, secure, and stable work environment. And then one of my personal favorites, the second from the bottom, I spend most of my time working in a physically threatening environment that requires me to make life and death decisions. Okay, that's typically more for police officers, fire, those kinds of things. And then the very bottom there, I regularly make decisions that could lead to major community or organizational consequences if I fail. So again, presidents, executive directors, county administrators, that kind of thing. So we ask you to choose the one that most closely matches what you do. Probably many of you will fall in the very first one. You work in a fairly stable, secure environment. Some of you may work with heavy machinery, something like that, that requires could result in bodily harm, but for the most part, you probably all work in a fairly stable, secure environment. Section 8, complexity, the complexity of your job. Again, the very first one, the least complex. I perform specific clerical or manual tasks. Some of my typical responsibilities may include copying, maintaining files, or entering data, or utilizing light mechanical equipment. Not a lot of complexity there. But as you progress through, let's see, kind of midway through there, I perform entry-level professional work, including basic data analysis and synthesis, report creation, that kind of thing. So it requires a little bit higher level of thinking. And then at the bottom, I develop policies, long-range plans, and allocate funds. So a much more complex environment there. So again, I ask you to read each phrase. And again, it's not necessarily going to match exactly, but from a holistic standpoint, where might you fit? And tell us why then you chose what you did in a narrative form. Decision making, very first one, I perform routine and clearly defined activities under close supervision. Have no decision making authority whatsoever. And it progresses down to, I perform work that involves high-level issues, processes, or organizational needs. So a significant amount of decision making. Yes?
Again, now, are we answering these questions based on our position description and what we were hired as, or as what we're actually doing currently?
I want you to answer all these questions about through what you're actually doing now. Not what your job description says, but what you're actually doing. What does your job actually stand right now? Relationships, I work primarily alone. I work with some other people. I supervise less than, I think it's 2. I oversee and manage more than 2. All the way down to I interact with senior managers, citizens, and elected officials. Now, in the next 3, I ask you to choose all that apply here. So not just one, but anything that applies. This has to do with your financial responsibilities. So you look through the list. You may not have any. So the very first one does not apply to my job, may be appropriate. But as you go through, you may see that, well, you know, I'm accountable for inventory. I also make recommendations that impact the budget, and I have some purchasing authority. So you would check all that apply here and tell us a little bit about why you chose what you did. Equipment and machinery, same concept here. Please choose all that apply. Now, some of these don't apply to your particular situation here, but we ask you to read through. Maybe you use computers. Maybe you use some highly technical applications, GIS, CAD, highly technical type things. Maybe you use or repair heavy or complex machinery such as HVAC systems. So read through and check all that apply. And again, tell us why you chose what you did. If you have specific comments you'd like to make, as you mentioned or asked earlier about narrative, include that in those 5 sections that we talked about closest match. Add some additional information there. So if you have some specific comments, please go ahead and put those in there because we do read all of the comments. Physical abilities, this is not what you are physically capable of, it's what the job requires. So for instance, in my job, while I am physically able to lift more than 60 pounds, I would probably check ability to lift more than 20 pounds. Or, yeah, that should be less than 20 pounds. Up to 20 pounds. So, again, what does the job require? My job doesn't require much lifting, but it is important that I be able to speak.
Question here.
Yes.
First says ability to hear, okay, or ability to see. Glasses, I mean, you just
Corrected is fine. So what we're really trying to get at here is someone who who cannot see, would they be able to do this job? And in a lot of instances, that's true.
You're assuming if I check the ability to see or ability to hear, that is including correction.
Yes, yes, yeah, absolutely. Yes?
You have an other, but you don't have a space to.
There is an actual space there. I mean, you don't see it on this sheet here, but there is an opportunity to tell us what the other is. And again, it'll look differently on the computer screen than it looks up here. I just wanted to give you an idea of what kinds of questions we ask and what we're looking for. Now, those are the sections of the job assessment tool. And as I mentioned earlier, you can go in and enter data and then come back later if you want. You don't have to do it all at once. But it reminds you to hit enter after each section. That allows you to go on to the next section. Save and continue saves what you have put in there. So go ahead and hit save and continue. When you're done with a section, you need to hit section completed. Because what happens is in the system, it tells us when you've finished, and it tells your supervisor when you've finished. So you may want to go through the entire thing before you complete any sections. You may want to work through it, save all your information, and then come back through and look at it again, and then hit section completed. When you hit section completed, then it's locked. If you accidentally lock it, send us an email and say, hey, I didn't mean to lock this section. Can you unlock it? And we can do that. I will tell you, we typically get to the emails every day. So if you email in the morning, you should hear back that day. If not, could be first thing in the morning. So kind of keep that in mind as you're waiting for a response. We try to get to each email every day, but sometimes it's the next morning. And this is the email when you hit help. This is the email address that we'll send it to. Talked about supervisor review earlier. I want to go over that one more time. There'll be that period where employees can fill out their JAT, March 3rd through the 21st. And then the next week, supervisors get to do the review. Again, they can't change answers. They can only agree or disagree and tell us why. And they'll have a 1-week period as well. Yes? Yes. Yeah, as soon as the employees complete the sections, you can go in as a supervisor. You don't have to wait until the 21st. But we like to then lock it so that supervisors have their own time to do it. Yes?
What happens with a new employee who hasn't been here, say, a full year, and hasn't experienced some of the big parts of their job?
There's a couple of ways that we can do that, and I can work with Susan on that. If someone doesn't feel like they can fill out a JAT appropriately, we can either take that person out, or we can have the supervisor do it, or the individual can fill it out, and the supervisor can then come in and augment. So there's a couple of ways we can handle that.
Okay.
But
I feel like it's important that it should be listed in the description, and maybe I can help her.
yeah, I mean, there's nothing to say that supervisors can't help the employees. It's not like a test where you have to do your part and the supervisor does their part. We just want to make sure that employees have the opportunity to provide their perspective, and that supervisors then have an opportunity to validate that perspective, either agreeing or disagreeing. So as an employee, if you don't feel comfortable or you want your supervisor's input, feel free to do that. We're not suggesting one way or the other. We just want you to have the opportunity to provide your perspective. This is what the management issues tool looks like. If you're a supervisor, you'll have the opportunity to fill this out. When you go in to do your job assessment tool, there'll be a link that you can go and fill out a management issues tool. So for instance, if you work in maintenance, for instance, and you can never get an HVAC person, this would be the place to say, you know, we have difficulty hiring HVAC because the pay grade we think is too low. And here's the recommended pay grade. So sometimes we find supervisors have a good understanding of what the market is for certain positions, particularly ones you can't seem to fill. So we'd like to get your feedback. Question?
With the difficult to recruit and retain due to current pay grade, does that have to reflect an actual situation? For example, if there's an employee that, if there's a position that was filled several years back, and there was some difficulty, but there would be, there's a perception that there would be a lot more difficulty today.
If you have the perception, that's fine. It doesn't. You don't have to have a specific example where you say this happened. If you feel or the perception is something, let us know. Because again, we're not going to look at this and go, oh, well, you know, Mr. Smith said this, therefore we must do it. We will use that as part of our analysis. If you say to me, I can never hire HVAC technicians, well, I want to make sure I survey that position. And we'll see what the market data shows. So we use all of these bits of information together to come up with the overall picture. Do you guys have any questions about who we are, what we're doing, or how your participation will involve and will be part of this process?
What is your process for evaluating or analyzing this data?
Which part? The internal, the job assessment tool. Those five sections where you have to choose a phrase, those are scored. They're weighted and scored. So basically, when we do the comparison across the organization, we use those 5 sections as scored positions in order to help us kind of figure out where and how jobs fit internally. So that's how we do that section. When we do the market analysis, it's simply a minimum and maximum of the market of that position, and we compare where you currently are in that. In the end, when we develop a solution or a recommended pay plan, we'll do a regression analysis to compare what the scoring on the job assessment tool is to what we have recommended to see if we get a nice linear line. And if we don't, there's some outliers, we look at those outliers. Yes?
Elizabeth, I wondered if you could address, for some folks, they either don't have access to a computer or they may not feel comfortable doing this online. Could you talk about how the hard copy might come into play?
Okay. For those individuals who don't want to do or don't feel comfortable doing it online, and we recommend you do it online, but if you don't feel comfortable or don't have access to a computer, we can do a hard copy. And so what I would ask then is that supervisors or the individuals, Susan, I would ask them to kind of work through you, and we can make sure you have the appropriate copy or print it off the internet, one or the other, and give those out, and then they send them back to you and then to us. And the reason we ask to do that is so that we have one focal point coming from the college for job assessment tools, so we don't get maybe 2 or 3 versions of the same one. So if you don't feel comfortable with the computer, you can fill out a hard copy. Yes?
Like on the first or second screen, you talked about making recommendations about salary ranges.
Mm-hmm.
When you do that, do you take in consideration the actual budget of this institution?
No. Typically what we'll do is we look again at the scoreable factors from the job assessment tool, and we kind of get an understanding of how jobs fit in the organization. We look at what you're currently paying, and we look at the market. Now, we do not make recommendations to decrease anyone's pay. We're only looking at salary ranges, and we are also looking to see where you fit within the range, but we don't make recommendations to decrease your pay. We come up with our plan, we'll do the cost analysis, and then we provide that to the client. And the client may say, wow, that's beautiful, Elizabeth, but there's no way we can afford this. Okay, well, we don't want you then to walk away and go, I can't do anything. So how do we develop some alternatives that the organization may be able to use? I just finished with a client a few weeks ago who we developed a pay plan based on the market and the internal assessment, and there was no way they could afford it, even over a 5-year period. So we gave them 3 alternatives. And they just happen to choose one of the alternatives. But there's best case, and then sometimes there's reality. And so we try to make sure that we give you the analysis, and then we give you some options that you can actually use.
Can I ask who or how is the market defined? I mean, is it community colleges on the eastern shore of Maryland?
It's going to be, one, the feedback we get from you guys in the focus group. It's going to be feedback from the interviews that we do. Once we get that feedback and we look at all of the jobs, because not all, there may be jobs that we want to survey local markets for, local governments for, maybe maintenance positions or something like that that don't have necessarily an educational focus to them. So we will come up with a recommended list of peers, and we'll send it over and send it over to Susan, and then the college will say, yes, Elizabeth, we like those, or no, we don't. Or, hey, take these out, but add these. So that's how we do that. We get approval on the peers before we send out the survey. And the list of peers and how we do the analysis will be in the final report. We provide it to the client. I can't speak from that point, but it should be public record, I would assume. But I can't speak to that specifically. What we do is we finish the report. We provide it to the client. Often there's a presentation that they like us to do, either for a board or a council or something. So we'll come in and do that.
So our HR department is your client?
The college is our client. Our point of contact is Susan. So we work through her.
The college is the client?
Yes. We are contracted by the college. Let me get him, and then I'll get you. Yes.
You've got my curiosity now. You mentioned a previous client, how they had to choose one of the three options because they couldn't meet the recommended pay grades, whatever you were saying.
Yes.
Okay. The three options, are they general enough that you can share with us?
I would really not feel comfortable doing that, but what I can tell you is this client had a very specific, a very defined pay plan, and so there weren't a lot of options to move people within it. They were on a step plan. So basically, if you had 10 years of experience, you were on step 10. They were 5 years behind. So someone who had 10 years of experience was on step 5 when they wanted to get them to step 10. And so that was costly because they had to have those predefined increases. So what we ended up doing is looking at a couple of options. One, to go to an open range, which they chose not to do because it was an educational institution and they were very comfortable with the step. But we also looked at ways to how they could catch up over more than 5 years, simply to meet the local government reality of the budget. So we looked at different ways to transition them, as well as different ways to set up the internal pay grade. It wasn't a straight everybody every year gets 1.5%. There were different levels in there for recruiting purposes. So again, we do the analysis. We want to give you a very solid recommendation, but at the same time, we want to give you alternatives so that you can do something, because not everyone can afford to do it. That's just the reality of public sector. Yes?
When you're going through this process, are you also going to be looking at grades, and will they change as well?
They could, yes. We look at everything. So they could change, they may not change until we see the data, I won't know. But we look at how your compensation is structured. We look at classifications. We also look at what pay is associated. Yes?
You said find your place within the range. What criteria are you putting out there to determine that?
I can't tell you that right now because I don't know. I need to look at how you're currently doing things. I need to look at your current philosophies, what your current policies say. Every organization is different. So until I start looking at the data, I won't know how you move people through your ranges.
There's more involved than just salaries in grades. It's also about compensation, vacation days.
Benefits,
and
yes.
Benefits and those things as well. So you say you're not going to decrease anyone's
Pay. Correct.
But yet you will be if those change. Because
No,
it'll
we never make a recommendation to reduce anyone's pay. So,
not so much their pay, but their vacation time, that's all part of their
right,
package.
we don't make recommendations to decrease anyone's pay or anything like that.
Benefits.
So,
I'm talking more about their benefits that are wrapped into the grade levels.
I'm not sure I'm following that.
Evergreen is not doing a study of our benefits. They're going to have some loose information about our benefits, but they're not actually surveying. That was an option that we at first put out to them to do a study of the benefits, but they are not actually going to be looking at our benefits and making recommendations to us about whether or not we need to change our benefits.
I'm not looking at that. I'm looking at, like, in the grades, aren't there certain grade levels that get more vacation
Yes.
than other grade
Yes.
levels?
Yes.
And if the grade levels change, then that changes as well.
Oh, okay, I understand.
And
what you're
that
saying.
is, that's a compensation issue there. So if they're not changing our pay, you are in a way, because if you change those grades, some folks won't get the same vacation that they've been getting, and that's a benefit.
Well, we wouldn't cut anyone's vacation. We would probably grandfather people in if there was a change, but it would maybe be different going forward if we change the grade structure.
Okay.
And I don't know that we will until I really look at the data, but thank you for bringing that up. That's a good point. Other questions? Well, I have my cards up here, so feel free to take one if you think of something later. And I appreciate your time this morning. And again, good luck going through it and filling out your JAT. We look forward to that.